Hi friends, welcome back to MTG. My name is Ken and today we're discussing the 100 best common and uncommon wildcards to unlock in Magic Arena. So for us Brawl players, obviously having 100 cards per deck might be daunting, especially if you don't have much of a collection. But the good thing is that there are a lot of cards that you'll find in the common and uncommon slot that are super good and super useful, cards that you just see played by everybody in the format. So for the sake of this video, I went through and picked 100 cards I think are must-haves. I try to keep these cards super universal, so ones that you'll go to for multiple decks and aren't super specific to one strategy. I will also include a Moxfield list with all these cards as well, just so you can kind of tuck it away later and use it as a reference. And lastly, this is going to be more in the style of my deck ticks at the end of all my gameplay videos, where I just sit down and go through each card and kind of give my thoughts on it as we go through. It's 100 cards. It's a bit of a long video, but hopefully it's useful to you. If you think there's a card I missed, please let me know, sound off in the comments, and help your fellow players out. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. All right, and welcome to the 100 commons and or uncommons that you should unlock. To make things simple, I went through and categorized these by color. The other thing I did is I did not include any multicolor spells for this because I felt I wanted to go as broad as possible and just include monocolor and colorless, things that you'll more likely use, whereas, you know, 2 to 3 color cards are great, but then they're very situational because of color identity and all that. So we'll start with the white. White cares about a few things, mostly removal and protection. So I have these categorized somewhat. They're kind of rough categories. Usually I'll have, you know, the two or three main categories and then kind of just a third row of cards that don't fall into either. For this one, we'll start with some protection spells. We have things like Dauntless Bodyguard. This is a 2/1 creature that comes in and protects one other creature. Usually in most cases it'll be your commander, but in other cases you might want to protect a important key piece. Just a great 1-drop. It's always useful and always helps deter your opponents from trying to destroy your stuff because you can just give it indestructible. Similar cards is Selfless Savior. Same thing, you don't select the creature at first, so some argue probably Selfless Savior is a bit better than Dauntless Bodyguard, but still both essentially come down and guarantee at least one free removal spell protection. God's Willing and Surge of Salvation, these are more kind of quick gotcha when an opponent tries to remove your card, whether it be your commander or anything, and it'll happen a lot. This is Historic Brawl after all, or should I say Brawl. You want to have some quick response to be able to deal with it and say, you know, not today. I think God's Willing's great. It gives you that additional scry, which is always just kind of nice. It also can work as a protection piece for evasion. Like if you're trying to get in for lethal, you can cast it, give your stuff protection from whatever color you're facing. It's just pretty universally good. Surge of Salvation, this is a personal favorite of mine. You and permanents you control gain hexproof till end of turn. Great, that's good enough to run. But then it also says prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. That's really good. It's kind of specific, but when the second ability is tangible and actually useful, it just makes the world of difference. This can single-handedly win you a game if somebody swings in with a big board, if they're in red or black, or if you're swinging into their board. Just great. But really what we want it for is the first ability, because it is a stop to whatever your opponent's trying to do to you. Here is a category of removal pieces. We have creature removal. We have some enchantment artifact removal. We'll just kind of quickly go through the list here. Patriarch's Humiliation. I don't see this card ran enough, and I know it's competing with cards like Swords to Plowshares. I guess Path to Exile now. And what's the other one? There's another alchemy one that is a rare that does a similar effect, but I like this one. Not so much for the just removal. Obviously you have to have a decent board state to actually destroy the creature, but this just turns off any creature your opponent has. If their commander's out, you cast this 1 mana, their commander's a vanilla creature until they're able to like either destroy it themselves, recast it, or in the case of a non-commander card, it's just forever just a vanilla creature. So I think this is a very underrated card and I would like to see it get more play. Dawnbridge Cleric is a great, it deals with enchantment specifically, though it's got that modal. It can snipe a card out of an opponent's graveyard. It can gain you life if you really need, though that's not really the mode you'll choose most often. But again, just having the modality of this I think makes this card quite viable. Thar's Commando is a creature that removes artifacts or enchantments. And also, Witch Enchanter also deals with artifacts and enchantments. They're both creatures. Witch Enchanter obviously has the benefit of being a land when you need it. But both of these are great. It gives you a body, but still lets you deal with something if you need. Ossification and Banishing Light are the two enchantment removals. And while people like to run these in enchantment-specific strategies, by no means does it need to just stay to those categories. These cards, I see them all the time because they're great. Deals with a non-land permanent, and enchantment removal is still a little more difficult than, let's say, creature removal. So there's a very good chance that you've dealt with your opponent's thing for the entirety of the game. Ossification is an aura that goes onto a land. You know, that matters less. It's still just dealing with, in this case, a creature or planeswalker. But it is an aura, which is interesting. I never really realized that until I see it get attached to an opponent's land as they cast it on me. Stroke of Midnight is our most universal. It's a 3 mana, but it deals with any non-land permanent, which is fantastic. It gives your opponent a 1/1 human, which really is negligible. It's not good for attacking. It can chump block maybe one turn, but I think it's still a very good trade. Moving on to this last column of white cards, these are kind of the ones that aren't really protection, aren't really removal, but I still think they're very viable and very good in almost any deck. Reprieve, I mean, I would have Mana Tithe here, but Mana Tithe is weirdly rare because of the Strixhaven Mystical Archives, so instead we have Reprieve. It still can singly shut down an opponent's play by bouncing the spell back to their hand. Obviously, it just usually delays them maybe one turn, or if it's a removal piece, they can sometimes recast it and doesn't feel quite as good then. But when somebody goes off with like a big bomb, they tap all their mana, or they sack a bunch of treasures to try and cast something and you reprieve it, it's a good feeling. Also, it draws you a card, which is kind of just incidental, but is also notable because that card can make the world a difference. The Birth of Melodis. This one I didn't quite get. This was when I was doing Standard, when I first started getting into Arena. This was always played in Standard, and I didn't quite understand the value of what this card provides. It has 3 modes. The first mode just searches up a plains into your hands, which is fantastic. It's basic, but still, it guarantees your land drop, and in white, sometimes that's not always guaranteed. The second ability creates a 0/4 defender, which is a great wall. I mean, it's a literal wall, but it's just a great blocker. It's an artifact, if that matters, and just it's a free body, and this is still all for 2 mana. And the last mode is you gain 2 life. Incidental. It might make the difference. It probably won't, but just having all those abilities on one card is just quite fantastic. And Rumor Gatherer. I mean, we know this card. We love this card. No matter what you're playing, you'll still have some form of creatures, whether it be your commander or tokens or whatever it is, and just having the ability to scry and then draw just smooths out your game significantly. And this card is uncommon, 3 mana. I think it's just a must-have. Okay, let's move on to blue. Blue likes to do 3 things most often: counter spells, bounce or remove creatures, and then draw cards. So these are sort of our 3 categories, though again, this last category is just kind of a mix of different things. The first one is counter magic. It's Brawl. Counter magic is very potent and is very common, and I think you're at a disadvantage if you try and play without it, when in blue at least, because blue does not have the normal removal that, let's say, a black or a white will have. So for the counter magic that we can craft for common or uncommon, we have an offer you can't refuse. Great 1 mana. This sees play in just like, this is one of the most common counter spells, period. So the fact that it's an uncommon is just great for us. Wash Away, arguably the best counter spell in Brawl. I have never not ran this in a blue deck. It just can shut down your opponent and slow them down quite significantly, and sometimes that's what you need. Though with that in mind, just remember that if an opponent has 1 blue mana open and you go for your commander, there's like a 50% chance it's going to be Wash Away, because people like to hold up the mana for it. But I mean, of course, it counters a commander for 1 mana, and also can counter things like Cascade or Play from Exile. It's just a very good card in this format. Negate, I mean, we don't have Counterspell, which is weird because, you know, Counterspell isn't usually a rare, but it is because of Mystical Archives. But Negate is still very good. It's a 2 mana, counter target non-creature spell. It counters removal, it counters board wipes, it counters things like the ultimatums. I don't know why that's where my mind went, but I'm just trying to think of the big splashy sorceries that can shut down a game. So I still think it's worth running, and it is a common. Sink into Stupor is the most new card on this list. Again, it has a nice thing with Witch Enchanter. It can be a land if you need it, but also it just bounces a non-land permanent and also bounces a spell back to an opponent's hand. So it does the reprieve effect, but it also can just bounce a permanent back to an opponent's hand. Non-land permanent. Yes, okay. I want to make sure it wasn't just creature. So just great. Another modal spell that can do really 3 things. This next category is kind of our removal-y package. Usually that comes in the form of exiling something or just bouncing it. Witness Protection, I guess, though, is the exception. It's a 1 mana aura that turns your opponent's creature into a 1/1 legitimate business person, which is also hilarious, but is also very good, especially for like a commander, because now they're stuck dealing with this enchantment on their commander. They can't really use it as just a force to attack with because it's a 1/1. And my one strategy for this, I would say, is if you do use this on your opponent's creature, do not block it, do not kill it, let it stay, because for as long as it's on the battlefield without abilities, it's useless to them. If you, let's say, put it on their commander and they swing at you, and you decide to block and kill their commander, they will probably just recast the commander, and it's just like it was never a legitimate business person to begin with, so just keep that in mind. Fading Hope is a 1 mana bounce spell. It's just good value. If it's mana value 3 or less, scry 1. That's just kind of gravy. It doesn't really matter, but a 1 mana instant to bounce any creature. It's just super good. It can save you from a lethal attack. It can just delay your opponent an extra turn. I think this is definitely worth running. Resculpt and Raven Form are very similar. Each have their pros and cons. Raven Form is 3 mana to hardcast, but it has Foretell, so you can pay 2 now and then just kind of tuck it away for a later turn and pay 1 mana to cast it. This gives your opponent a 1/1 bird, whereas Resculpt is 2 mana. It hits artifact or creature. Let me check. Oh, this one does both artifact and creature as well. Okay, so they hit the same things. But this one gives your opponent a 4/4 elemental. That might matter. That might be a body that's just hitting you hard enough that might just lose you the game. Or it might be something that's more incidental. You know, a nice 1/2 punch if you had it would be Resculpt, something super threatening, and then Fading Hope, the 4/4. Bam. Now you got nothing to worry about. But in general, I still think these are both worth running. In blue, you don't really have permanent creature removal at the ready, so I don't know. I still like both of these cards. This last category just kind of sums up everything else blue wants to do. Slip Out the Back is kind of like a God's Willing effect. It just protects something for 1 turn. This phases it out, which saves it from board wipes, which is kind of nice, and puts a counter, which is incidental. Solve the Equation just essentially is a free tutor to get up whatever you need in the moment, whether it be counter magic, a removal spell, a board wipe, ramp, whatever you're searching for. You can pretty easily find it with Solve the Equation. I see it a ton. I go up against this card quite often just because it's great, because it helps find an answer when you need it. Narset. This is, I think, the only Planeswalker in this collection, and one thing that is important in Brawl is resource denial for your opponents. In this case, Narset prevents your opponents from drawing more than 1 card each turn. It has a -2 ability, which is actually quite useful and helps you kind of just churn through your deck a bit faster. But at the end of the day, you want this Planeswalker to sit out and just deny your opponent from drawing cards. And lastly, Lauren Revealed. This is a... I don't know, is it still underrated? I still think it's underrated. It's 5 mana, that's expensive, but it's a 5 mana draw 3, which is a lot of cards, especially if you're late game. But also if you're early game, it has Island Cycling 1. You pay 1, you discard it, throw it away, and you go fetch up any island, which in this case it can be a Triome, Surveil Land, a basic, anything. So If this is an opening hand and let's say I only have 2 lands, it's probably going to be a keep because I know I can use this to go fetch probably my best land in the deck. So that's blue. We'll now be moving on to black. All right. Black likes to remove things. Black is the creature removal color, so you can guess we're going to have a lot of that. We are not starved for resources, which is great. Black also cares about giving you resources, usually at a cost of some way, and also has some few extra tricks that we'll get into. But the first thing we're going to talk about is removal. We have no shortage of that. We'll quickly go through this list because it's a bit of a long one. We have Blood Chief's Thirst, Cut Down. Great, fantastic 1 mana removal pieces, usually a little conditional, but that condition is usually easily met. Accursed Marauder is a new one. It actually falls in the same category as Playcrafter down here. It's removal on creatures. Usually you'll end up just sacking this creature to its own ability and removing something of your opponent's, but sometimes it matters. Sometimes the creature sticks around, but it gets around indestructible. It gets around hexproof because it's a sack effect. Bitter Triumph, Feed the Swarm, Bell, Go for the Throat, Heartless Act, Infernal Grasp are all 2 mana, destroy a creature, and there's always at least one caveat for each of them. They're all good. Usually won't run them all in one deck, but I run some assortment of at least 4 of them in any deck, along with my other removal pieces. Feed the Swarm hits enchantments, which is probably the most important out of all these cards because black does not deal with enchantments almost ever. You lose life, but life's a resource. We all know this. Feed the Swarm, probably the best. It's sorcery speed, though I find in Brawl, I'm usually casting my removal on my turn anyways because I want to try and do it when my opponent doesn't have mana untapped, and usually that's most likely in my turn. Also, I'm just a casual chump who plays sorceries or instants at sorcery speed, so I don't know. Maybe that's a me problem. Bitter Triumph is great. Hits a Planeswalker. Cost is either 3 life or discard a card. Feld is the newest. It has no condition. I guess the conditions, it's a sorcery, though just see my point about casting them on my turn. Go for the Throat hits non-artifacts. Heartless Act destroys creatures without counters or removes counters. Infernal Grasp, you lose 2 life. It's all incidental in the grand scheme. You're willing to pay any of these for almost any card as long as it's removed, and we don't have to deal with it anymore. Last one's Shielder's Edict. It's kind of more like an Accursed Marauder effect. It's a sack effect, but it's on an instant and can deal with non-tokens, tokens, or planeswalkers. I go up against this card all the time. I started running it myself, and I've never been disappointed. This card always hits what I need it to. The next category is giving us resources. This is usually in the form of either cards or sometimes treasure. Deadly Dispute. I love this card. I've loved this card since it came out. I run it in my paper decks. I run it in my arena decks. It's just such a good card. You have to sack a creature or an artifact. Usually there's something incidental you're willing to lose, and you get 2 cards and a treasure token. That's just so much good value. I love it. Painful Bond is a arena specific one. This one lets you draw 2 cards for 2 mana, and then says non-land cards in your hand with mana value 3 or less perpetually gain. When you cast it, you lose 1 life. It's very incidental. There's some instances where maybe there'll be 1 card in your hand that will have this effect, but usually it's worth it to get those 2 cards for 2 mana at instant speed in black. Morbid Opportunist and Pitiless Plunder, I feel like these are companion cards. One gives you treasures when another creature dies, the other gives card draw. Morbid happens once each turn, but that's usually fine. Pitiless Plunder, it's just, you know these cards. These are just fantastic cards. I include them in any deck that is black, and I mean, even if I don't have a sack specific strategy, there's usually enough things being removed in a game that these cards will get you enough value to be worth running. This last category, these are just kind of the, you know, extra things that blacks likes to do. Blood Artist, this is probably the most strategy specific one in all the deck, but again, as I said about things always dying, being removed in Brawl games, Blood Artist is just a classic. I mean, just to have it in your collection, it's worth unlocking, to be honest. I love this card. It's tried and true and can help turn the tide of a game really fast. These last 2 are Sagas, which I actually didn't realize these were uncommons until I started making this list. These are 2 I run quite often. sorry, not ECD, Elspeth's Nightmare. Destroys a creature with power 2 or less on the first mode. Essentially empties a card out of an opponent's hand on the second mode, and then exiles opponent's graveyard on the third mode for 3 mana. This is fantastic. There's always graveyard shenanigans happening, and having an answer to that is can win you the game on its own. And then the Eldest Reborn. Each opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker. Each opponent discards a card, and then put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. These are kind of like almost foils to themselves. The first 2 abilities are like super similar, and then the last one gets something back from either graveyard, whereas Elspeth's Nightmare just exiles the opponent's graveyard. So both fantastic, and also can just turn the tide of a game quite easy. So that was for black, and let's move on to red. Okay, so red likes treasures and red likes to burn. So in the first category here, these are all treasure producers. Obviously, if you're playing in a deck without green, you're playing, let's say, Boros, Rakdos, Izzet. Your ramp is going to quite often be in the form of treasures. Treasures are, you know, they say the 6th land, and I don't disagree with that. So we have quite a few cards that are pretty low mana, but still net you quite a bit of value. Beamtown Beatstick and Sticky Fingers, they're almost the exact same ability. One is an equipment though, one is an aura. So both these cards give menace, which is great early game evasion, and then whenever a enchanted creature deals combat damage, I believe it's combat damage. Yep, both just generate a treasure. It's great early game. Usually if you're red, you have some form of, you know, aggro. That's what red likes to do. So just having some early ways of generating treasures is great. It can help smooth out the mid to late game. Goldhound is just a 1 mana. It's kind of like a one-time mana dork, really. It's just a treasure creature that comes down and then can be used next turn. Cast your commander a turn early, or just stick around and hit your opponent for a bit until you need the mana. Strike It Rich is a 1 mana kind of... this is kind of one of those cards where it's like, if you don't need the mana now, just cast this card and kind of tuck the treasure away for later. It's great. I love seeing it turn 1 because it's just an easy, free turn 1 play, and you go into turn 2 with 3 mana. It also has flashback for, you know, if you need treasure specifically later in the game. Plundering a Barbarian, here's another modal spell. This one destroys artifacts or creates treasure tokens. I find to usually use the first ability first, though the second one is notable, and it's on a creature, which is still a 2/2 body, so it's just good. I love modality. I love modal spells, and I find them the most useful, especially for something like this, where we're trying to craft cards we can use in multiple decks without breaking the bank. Words. Seize the Spoils, Unexpected Windfall, Big Score. They're all pretty similar. I think Big Score and Unexpected Windfall are like the exact same. These just usually, you go down a card, which, you know, might not always be the best in red, but in turn you get more cards and you get treasures. So Seize the Spoils is a 3 mana sorcery that if you discard a card, you draw 2, create a treasure token. That's great. Big Score is an instant and an Unexpected Windfall. I'm just confirming that these are like the exact same. Cast spell, discard, draw 2, create 2, discard a card, draw 2, create 2. Yeah, so they do the exact same thing. I think the only difference is Unexpected Windfall is 2 red pips, Big Score is 1. But run them both. Honestly, if you're in red, you want that card draw, you want that mana generating, and they're just great. You hold up the mana, you play on your end step, or your opponent's end step, I should say, and you go into your next turn with everything you would need. Stormkiln, some would say this is situational. I don't think so, just because we're in a format that runs a lot of removal, which means you're still going to have a lot of instants and sorceries. So anytime you cast an instance or sorcery spell, or copy, in case that matters, you create a treasure token. It's just generates enough value that I find it worth running in most any deck. We'll go on to the burn spells. Less here than, I mean, there's like an endless amount of them. I just kind of pick the ones that I use the most and I think are the most useful. We don't have Lightning Bolt, at least not in the current format, because it is a rare thanks to the Mystical Archives, as I said before. So we're just going to find some like Lightning Bolts at home in the meantime. Play with Fire. 1 mana instant, deals 2 damage to any target, but if you do it to a player, you scry 1, so that could be good. Strangle is a sorcery speed lightning bolt. Again, I still think it's really good and worth running. Abrade is lightning bolt or destroy target artifact. It's super modal. I run this in literally every red deck I build. Cast into Fire, I run a little less, but also has a very, very good ability. Honestly, and I get for the flavor, I get why this card exiles an artifact, but like the fact that this is hit my ring. The fact that this is the perfect foil to the One Ring, I think is hilarious and the most flavorful card you could ever have. It also deals 1 damage to each up to 2 targets, and you'd be surprised how many little like mana dorks or value creatures you can pick off for 1 damage. And Fire Prophecy is a 2 mana lightning bolt, but also lets you tuck a card away and draw a new card. So if you're flooded for mana, you can throw one of your lands away and get something else. Or you're looking for a land, you can just tuck down like one of your high mana cards you're not going to cast for a while, and hopefully you draw land off that. So moving to the last category, we have Bitter Reunion. Red cares about haste, and again, red isn't the best at drawing cards, but this still lets you draw 2 if you discard a card. It's an enchantment, which is means it sticks around, which is kind of nice. And it also has pay 1, sack it. Creatures you control gain haste till end of turn. That's great. Your opponent always forgets his cards on the battlefield, especially if your opponent's me. And it can just win you a game in towards the later stages. And it's just it's 2 mana. It gets you value. It gets you card draw. I think the second ability is fantastic and just gravy on top, if I'm being honest. Reckless Impulse, 2 mana. I still think it's good even in non-play from exile strategies, just because it gets to go 2 cards deep. You get to play till the end of your next turn. So if you hit a land, you're guaranteed your land drop. If you hit something else, there's a good chance between this turn and the next one you'll be able to play it. It's 2 mana. It's just a really good alternative for cards that maybe have you discard to draw a card. Lastly, Young Pyromancer. See what I said about Stormkiln. This one just gives you little incidental creatures. Maybe a little situational, but again, we're running a lot of instants and sorceries. In a format like this, I still think it's worth running. So that's red. Now let's move on to green, because there's a lot to talk about here. So green cares about mana, and green also likes removing enchantments and artifacts. So we have a lot of mana dorks, we have a lot of mana ramp. I said this in my For Beginners video, but I truly believe green is the best color to start with, because so many of the staples in this color are available and are like on this screen now. All these cards are super viable. They're played in any green deck, and it's just a great place to start because you can get all these cards for like next to nothing because they're easy to unlock wild cards. But let's get into it. We'll start with the mana dorks. Again, this category could go on forever. These are the 4 that I like and I prefer to run. Elvish Mystic, Llanowar, they're both the same thing. They come down turn 1, they get you ahead 1 mana. They're commons, which is fantastic. Birds of Paradise, I think, is the best 1 mana dork, but it's rare, so it's not in this list. Armored Scrapgorger is just a great 2 mana graveyard hating deck. Again, I said earlier that a lot of decks rely on their graveyards, and something like this with the incidental graveyard removal can just help you out significantly. And it taps for 1 mana of any color, which is fantastic because you can run this in 2 color, 3 color, 4 color decks. It's always going to be worth its value. And then Poison Dart Frog, I mean, look how cute it is. I like it. It's 2 mana, taps for 1 mana any color, but I'll be honest, if you just leave this card untapped and pass your turn with 2 mana up, I can guarantee your opponent will pass through combat and not attack you. This is the threat of activation of this card. Having Death Touch and Reach means that it can just kill any attacker. It's such a silly card, but can just hold up an opponent for several combats because they're just too afraid to swing into it. So for that reason, I think it's worth mentioning. This category is like land mana accelerating, so this is rant specific spells or play extra land spells. Arboreal Grazer and Kami essentially do the same thing. Kami has a channel ability. I don't think I've ever used a channel ability, though it is still really good and like not useless by no means. These all just come down turn 1 and get 2 lands out turn 1. Again, it just gets you 1 turn ahead of your opponent. but also they provide blocking bodies. Grazer is a 0-3 with reach, which isn't like useless by no means. And then Kami is a 1-1, but again, this has a channel ability, which is great if you're able to utilize that. Explore is just a card draw, play an extra land. It's just a good, I usually run it in any green lands deck. I'm usually always by turn 2, I guess it'd be turn 2 by the time you can cast this. I always at least have one land in hand I'm willing to throw down, and it also draws you a card, so you might just draw your land that you need when you do that. Into the North is probably the best ramp spell in this format. As you may have noticed if you watch my videos, or if you're just playing the format a lot, you see most players, or a large majority of them, run snowlands. And I know there's a whole thing about snowlands are just incidental value, that like there's no downfall to running them over basic lands. In paper, it's usually because they're a little more expensive than basic lands, but in this format, it's so incidental that it's just a 2-mana ramp spell. Anytime I run into the North specifically, I just replace all my basics with snow basics, and that means I have a 2-mana ramp spell. I think it's the best in the format, and highly overlooked, and also is one of those sets, I don't know when this came into the format, so if you know, let me know. I know it's I think that might be Ice Age, or around the Ice Age time when this card originally came out, but I don't know how it got into this format, so if you know, let me know in the comments. Cultivate, it's just like the quintessential ramp spell. Puts one in your hand, one on the battlefield. Fantastic. Entish Restoration. You sack a land, but you go search up 2. Or if you have a commander or a creature with power 4 or greater, you search up 3. And this is an instant, so I think this is an overlooked card. And great in big mana or just ramp matters decks. Heaped Harvest, this is a super new one, and I haven't got a lot of time to play with it, but I think it's really good. It's a 3-mana artifact that when enters, gets you a basic on the battlefield, and when it when it's sacrificed, it gets you an artifact on the battlefield. It's a food, or sorry, an artifact. It gets you a basic on the battlefield, so you get 2 basics essentially for this. It's a food, so it has the food ability, which means you can pay 2 mana, sack it, gain the life, and still get that land. But also, how many things care about you just sacking artifacts incidentally? I think this is a super good card. I have a feeling we're going to see it quite often. At least I'm going to try and run it and see if it's worth playing. Still the Wild, this is the Alchemy ramp spell here. It's really good. It seeks a basic land card onto the battlefield, which is pretty much tutored. I guess you just don't get to decide what basic you get. Usually that doesn't matter as much. And then it says seek a permanent card with mana value equal to the number of lands you control. If it's early game, you'll just essentially just says draw a card. If it's late game, it might do nothing, but by that time, Settle of the Wild isn't gonna be as good anyways. But it's really good. To me, it just reads ramp a basic, draw a card, essentially. Here is our artifact and enchantment removal. We have Haywire Might. This is a colorless spell, but it has a green activated ability, so it is a green card. It's just so good. Again, it's the threat of activation with this one that it just really deters your opponents from playing any like mana rocks or like Bolas's Citadels or those kind of big artifacts or enchantments. Atrax's Fall, I started running more and I've been pretty happy with it. It destroys an artifact. Battle, which sometimes can be important. Enchantment or creature with flying. I find quite often I end up hitting a flying creature. People love to run Atraxa, which is ironic because this card's called Atrax's Fall, so it's just flavorful when you get to use this against your opponent's Atraxa. Broken Bond is a similar effect to the Explore, except instead of draw a card, this one lets you destroy an artifact or enchantment. Very good. Wear Down, this is another new one that I want to just play around with more, but it seems like it's super good. So you can gift a card to your opponent, which is, you know, not the best, not the worst. You can destroy target artifact or enchantment, but if the gift was given, you instead destroy 2 artifacts and or enchantments, which is just super good. For 1 card, you can pretty much just like stop whatever your opponent's doing, whether it be ramping with mana rocks, or maybe they have an enchantment strategy. It seems super good for 2 mana. And lastly, Rex Sage. I don't need to say anything. This is just a great creature. It comes down, deals with something. We love Rex Sage. This last category is things that don't fall under those categories we talked about, but are still very good. Tameo Safekeeping. Again, it's just another 1 mana save something kind of spell. Same as your God's willing and your slip out the back. Very similar, and I swear the opponent always has this in their hand whenever I try and remove something. I see this card so often. I use it all the time, but also I just see it so much that it can shut down your play if something super powerful ends up sticking around because your opponent used safekeeping. Kinra's transformation, also very good. Green has fight spells and abilities like this. They don't have a lot of normal just destroy creatures. So in like a mono green deck, this just again shuts down an opponent's commander. Same with the legitimate business person, and can just like completely shut down your opponent's strategy, especially if you hit their commander. Again, same strategy. Quite often, I would say just take the 3 damage if they try and swing in, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to be very reckless with their commander to try and have it die, so they can recast it and get back to their game plan. Peerless Recycling, another new one, another gifted card. I think there was a lot of good common and uncommons from this set, and I'm excited to have them in the format. This one is a recursion piece. Usually there's something worth getting back, especially in a format that removes a lot of cards. And this one lets you just get 1 or 2 things back depending on how bad you need the thing. And at 2 mana, instant, I think is just really good. Balagad, I love this card. It's the original modal land on the back kind of spell. MDFCs, I guess is what they're called. And just returns anything back to your hand. So a removal piece, a board wipe, just anything. And if it's early game, just play it as a land. Don't hang on to this if you... I guess what I should say is never hold this back if you're missing a land drop. Always just play this. Even if it's tabbed and it doesn't get you where you want to go at the speed you want to go, just play it as a land, please. It's just better than holding this card up in your hand. Garruk's Uprising. It's just card draw, gives creatures trample. We're in green. It's not hard to get power 4 or greater. And I think just as an uncommon, it's worth having because you're going to find this card quite useful in a lot of the decks you build. And Tireless Provisioner, the probably one of the most popular cards in the format if you're playing green, because green likes to ramp and green likes to make foods and treasures and everything else. This card could have been a rare very easily. I'm glad it's not, because that means it's more accessible to people. So that was green, a lot of mana. We have a few more categories to go through. We have artifacts and lands, so let's get into those. All right, for the artifacts, I really stuck it down to the things that you'll find yourself using all the time, kind of like the rest of the list. And in this case, it was some protection and also mana rocks. The protection, Swiftfoot Boots, uncommon, love it. Any deck that the commander really needs to stick around for my strategy to work, I will put Swiftfoot Boots in it. It's just great. It gives hexproof, it gives haste. Lava Spur Boots is the newer version. Obviously, it just gives Ward 1, which isn't as good, but it still gives haste and is also very cheap to equip. So you can just keep equipping it to creatures as you cast them, and essentially you have haste on your board the entire game, really. And then we have mana rocks. These just, I usually run them less in green decks, usually not at all, unless I have an artifact specific green deck. Or I should say artifacts matter, but there's a lot to choose from. These are my go-tos. There's still more that you can choose, but these are just the ones I think are the best. Arcane Signet, duh. I mean, it's the best mana rock. It taps for any color. We don't have Soul Ring in this format, but Arcane Signet is still a close second. Cold Steel Harp, another one that came from the same set as Into the North. I don't know why it's in this format, but I love it. You'll see this card quite often just because it comes in tapped, but it still just helps color fix you and is super good, and it's just a great mana rock. This is my second go-to. My third go-to in this slot is Mind Stone. If I'm running a lot of colors, like not two, but usually 3 or more colors, I try and avoid Mind Stone just because sometimes you need that color fixing, but still, it's still just a great 2-mana mana rock that you can use to get a land later on. Ornithopter Paradise is a mana dork. I run this one usually in artifact specific strategies. It has flying, which is great. It has 0 attack, so that's not great, but you know, sometimes it's fun just to swing at your opponent with this anyways, as a sign of dominance, I guess. But still, 2 mana, taps for any color. I still think it's a great card. These last 2 are 3 mana mana rocks. And while 3 mana rocks usually want to have some sort of benefit to them, I think these ones are still worth running. Patchwork Banner, If you're running any creature type strategy, you just get more power, so it's an Anthem on board, but also still just taps for 1 mana of any color. Again, you could say this is strategy specific, but it just cares about any deck that has several of a creature type, so I think it's a pretty good one to run. And the Warm Power Stone, I've been getting more on this card as of late. Obviously, it's like slow fixed Soul Ring. It's 3 mana and enters tapped, but I still think it's really good. It's not so good that you find it constantly getting removed, like let's say a Key to the Archive or a Gilded Lotus, but it's still good enough that it'll just turn 3, or if you can get this out turn 2, fantastic. If you can get out turn 3, it still just accelerates you into the mid game and is really good. So I've been super up on this card. Wayfarer's Bauble is not a mana dork or a mana rock. It's a basic land fetching card, which it's okay. Here's my thing on Wayfarer's Bauble. It is one of my favorite most played cards in paper if I'm not playing green or I'm playing this artifact specific strategy. In Brawl, it's a little slow, though I still think if you're wanting to get a lot of mana out and you'd rather go this route than, let's say, Mana Rock that could get destroyed, I still think it's worth running. It's a common, it's great to have on hand, especially if you are not playing in green, so I still think it's worth mentioning in this list. And lastly, let's talk. I didn't go super heavy on lands. I just wanted to hit a few. Some of these lands represent the full cycle of lands, so you can get them in any color, but these are the ones you want to keep an eye out aside from your basics. Gate to the Citadel, any gate, to be honest, there's one of every color. Comes in tapped, but it just lets you seek a non-land card, and that, again, it essentially means draw card. And just late game, it could make the difference, truly. It activates only once, but usually it's all you need, especially if you're just trying to dig for an answer. Mystic Sanctuary usually cares more about an instant and sorcery strategy, obviously, but again, this is quite incidental. It can come in untapped. It is an island, and it's a common, so it's just nice to have there if you need it. And there's also several in this, again, in the cycle that is worth running if you find it pertinent to your strategy, but otherwise it's just incidental value because it's on a land. Bojuka Bog. Put Bojuka Bog in your decks. It is the most incidental graveyard removal you could possibly have. It's worth it, even though it comes in untapped, comes in tapped, and turn 1, it's still not a bad land to play. Sure, it doesn't do anything, but still, it's a turn 1. If you don't have a turn 1 play, you would never notice that it comes in tapped. Please just run Bojuka Bog. Also, there is a man in that swamp, and I've never noticed that before. Okay. Command Tower. Duh. People run this in monocolor decks, and I genuinely cannot figure out why. Let me know if you do, and tell me your reasoning for it. My mindset always just goes to a basic is just as good. But if you have a reason you run Command Tower at monocolor, let me know. Demolition Field. Really good to snipe out those super valuable lands that your opponents might be playing. Again, it's incidental. It still taps for colorless. It comes in untapped, and it also replenishes the land you destroy and this land. So I think it's the best land destruction land in the format, at least for uncommon. And last, the newest I think of this list, at least for the lands, is Urza's Cave. It's a land, again, comes in untapped, taps are colorless, but then can just search up your best land, and that can be super good depending on what kind of strategy you're going for. If you have something that cares about lands that tap for a lot of mana, lands that maybe sack to do something, it's so incidental that I think it's worth running. Quite often, whatever you get for Urza's Cave, you'll want to also destroy with Demolition Field if you're playing against it. So, you know, foils. They care about the opposite thing. That's a list. Please let me know what you think. I know there's a ton that I definitely missed, but I really wanted to keep it to 100 cards and try and be pretty even amongst each colors. There's still going to be more in one category than the other, but I just went through them all and found the ones that I think are worth running. If you found this video useful, let me know in the comments. If you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of Brawl gameplay, but I've been doing a lot more of these kind of tips videos for early players, or maybe just people who want to just learn more about the format. Until then, I will see you in the next video. So goodbye.